A poor maid, desperate for help to cover her mother's medical treatment, accepts an unusual proposal from her billionaire employer to carry his heir. However, when the baby was born, nothing went as planned. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Hawkins estate, its golden rays barely penetrating the thick fog that clung to the ground like a reluctant lover. In the quiet of dawn, a solitary figure made her way up the winding driveway, her steps quick and purposeful despite the weight of exhaustion that seemed to pull at her very bones. Morgan Hayes adjusted the strap of her worn messenger bag, her fingers tracing the frayed edges absently as she approached the imposing mansion that loomed before her. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her humble origins and the struggles that had shaped her young life. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a neat bun, a few wisps escaping to frame a face that was more striking than beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of warm honey. As she reached the service entrance, Morgan paused, taking a deep breath to steel herself for another day in a world that was not her own. The contrast between her life and the opulence that surrounded her never failed to strike her, even after months of working as a maid in the Hawkins household. She thought of her tiny apartment in the city, of her mother's labored breathing and the mounting medical bills that threatened to drown them both. With a silent prayer for strength, Morgan pushed open the door and stepped into the cool, sterile interior of the mansion. Inside, the house was already stirring to life. Other members of the staff moved about with quiet efficiency, preparing for another day in service to one of the wealthiest men in America. Morgan nodded to a few familiar faces as she made her way to the staff locker room, exchanging her street clothes for the crisp black and white uniform that marked her as just another cog in the well-oiled machine that was Alexander Hawkins' life. As she pinned her name tag in place, Morgan caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to another night spent at her mother's bedside, monitoring her breathing and praying for a miracle that seemed increasingly out of reach. She forced a smile, remembering her mother's words, "Keep your chin up, sweetheart. The world responds to the face you show it." With that thought bolstering her resolve, Morgan set about her morning tasks. She moved through the vast rooms of the mansion with practiced ease, dusting priceless artifacts and straightening items that seemed perfectly in place to begin with. Each room was a study in understated elegance, a testament to the exacting standards of the man who owned it all. It was in the library that Morgan first encountered Alexander Hawkins that morning. She had just finished polishing the massive mahogany desk when the door swung open, revealing the master of the house in all his imposing glory. At 38, Alexander Hawkins cut a striking figure. Tall and lean, with sharp features and eyes the color of a winter sky, he exuded an aura of power and control that seemed to fill the room. Morgan immediately straightened, her heart rate quickening, as it always did in his presence. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins," she murmured, lowering her eyes respectfully. Alexander's gaze swept over her, cool and assessing. "Ms. Hayes," he acknowledged with a curt nod. He moved to the desk, his movements precise and economical. Everything about him spoke of discipline and restraint, from the perfect Windsor knot of his tie to the meticulously styled dark hair that didn't dare to fall out of place. As he settled into his chair, Alexander's eyes fell on a small smudge on the corner of the desk. His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Hayes, I believe you missed a spot." Morgan felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hawkins. I'll take care of it right away." She moved quickly to rectify her mistake, acutely aware of his piercing gaze following her every movement. As she worked, Morgan couldn't help but reflect on the rumors that swirled around Alexander Hawkins. They said he was brilliant but cold, a man who had built an empire through sheer force of will and an unyielding dedication to perfection. Some whispered that he was incapable of true emotion, that his heart was as hard and impenetrable as the steel and glass towers that bore his name across the city skyline. Yet as Morgan stole glances at him from beneath her lashes, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. There were moments fleeting and rare when she caught a glimpse of something else in his eyes, a shadow of loneliness perhaps, or a hint of some long-buried pain. But those moments passed as quickly as they came, leaving her to question whether she had imagined them entirely. "That will do, Ms. Hayes." Alexander's cool voice cut through her thoughts. "You may go." Morgan nodded, gathering her cleaning supplies. As she turned to leave, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled, her hand shooting out to steady herself against the bookshelf. In an instant, Alexander was beside her, his strong hands gripping her arms to keep her from falling. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with something that might have been concern. Morgan blinked, struggling to regain her composure. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I didn't eat breakfast this morning." Alexander's eyes narrowed, taking in her pale face and the slight tremor in her hands. "That's unacceptable. You can't perform your duties properly if you're not taking care of yourself." Morgan felt a flash of indignation at his words, but she swallowed it down. He couldn't possibly understand the choices she had to make, the sacrifices that came with trying to keep her mother alive and a roof over their heads. "It won't happen again, sir," she said quietly. Something in her tone must have caught Alexander's attention. He studied her face intently, as if seeing her for the first time. "Is everything all right, Miss Hayes? You seem distracted lately." For a moment, Morgan was tempted to unburden herself, to tell this man who held so much power about the crushing weight of her mother's illness and the mounting debts that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. But she thought better of it. Alexander Hawkins was her employer, not her confidant. She forced a smile. "Everything's fine, Mr. Hawkins. Thank you for your concern." Alexander held her gaze for a long moment, and Morgan had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her facade. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Take your break now, Ms. Hayes, and see that you eat something." As Morgan left the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there, a crack in the carefully constructed wall that separated their worlds. The day wore on, each hour bringing with it a fresh wave of worry for Morgan. During her lunch break, she called the hospital to check on her mother, only to be told that her condition had worsened overnight. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. "We need to discuss more aggressive treatment options, Ms. Hayes, but I have to warn you, they're quite expensive." Morgan fought back tears as she ended the call, her mind racing with desperate calculations. She had already taken out loans, maxed out her credit cards and picked up every extra shift she could, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. As she made her way back to her duties, Morgan's thoughts were a swirling mess of fear and determination. She was so lost in her own world that she almost collided with Alexander as he rounded a corner. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going," she stammered, mortified by her clumsiness. Alexander steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, his touch sending an unexpected jolt through her. "No harm done, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you sure you're all right? You seem troubled." In that moment, something in Morgan broke. Maybe it was the unexpected kindness in his voice, or the crushing weight of her worries, or simply the fact that she was so tired of carrying it all alone. Whatever the reason, the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "It's my mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's very ill. The doctors say she needs more treatment, but I don't know how I'm going to pay for it." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hawkins. I shouldn't be burdening you with my personal problems." Alexander was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words took Morgan completely by surprise. "Come to my study this evening, after your shift ends. I believe I may have a proposition for you." Before Morgan could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing in the hallway with a mixture of confusion and trepidation swirling in her chest. What kind of proposition could Alexander Hawkins possibly have for her? And why did she have the feeling that her answer to whatever he proposed would change the course of her life forever? As the day drew to a close, Morgan found herself standing outside Alexander's study, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Was she really ready for whatever lay on the other side of that door? But then she thought of her mother, of the lines of pain etched into her beloved face, and she knew she had no choice. For her mother, she would do anything. With a deep breath, Morgan squared her shoulders and knocked. "Enter," came Alexander's voice from within. Morgan stepped into the study, her eyes immediately drawn to the man behind the desk. Alexander sat there, his posture perfect, his gaze intense as he motioned for her to take a seat. "Miss Hayes," he began, his voice measured and calm, "I've been giving some thought to your situation, and I believe I have a solution that could benefit us both." Morgan leaned forward, her heart racing. What kind of solution, Mr. Hawkins? Alexander's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a complexity of emotion that took her breath away. It's rather unconventional, he said slowly, but I assure you it could solve all your financial problems and give me something I've been seeking for a very long time. As Morgan sat there, poised on the edge of her seat, she had no idea that the words Alexander was about to speak would change her life forever. She only knew that, for better or worse, she was ready to hear them. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in Alexander's study seemed to grow louder with each passing second, filling the room with a palpable tension. Morgan sat frozen, her mind struggling to process the words that had just left Alexander's lips. His proposition hung in the air between them, as weighty and unexpected as a summer storm. You want me to have your baby?" Morgan finally managed to stammer, her voice barely above a whisper. "In exchange for $5 million? Alexander leaned back in his chair, his steel blue eyes never leaving her face. "That's correct, Miss Hayes. I require an heir, but I have no desire for the complications that come with romantic entanglements. You, on the other hand, need a substantial sum of money. This arrangement would solve both our problems." Morgan's thoughts whirled like leaves caught in a gale. Part of her wanted to laugh, to dismiss the whole thing as some sort of elaborate joke, but the seriousness in Alexander's eyes told her this was no laughing matter. This was real. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her hands twisting in her lap. It's not something I ever imagined." "I understand it's a lot to take in," Alexander said, his tone softening slightly. "I don't expect an answer right away. Take some time to think it over. But I would advise you not to dismiss it out of hand. $5 million could change your life, Ms. Hayes. It could save your mother's life." At the mention of her mother, Morgan felt a sharp pang in her chest. She thought of the hospital bills piling up, of the increasingly desperate look in the doctor's eyes as they discussed options. $5 million would indeed change everything. But at what cost? "May I ask, why me?" Morgan ventured, meeting Alexander's gaze. "Surely there are women out there more suitable for this kind of arrangement." A shadow passed over Alexander's face, gone so quickly Morgan almost thought she'd imagined it. "You're discreet, Ms. Hayes. You have no connections to my social circle, no ambitious family looking to climb the social ladder, and most importantly, you have a pressing need that I can fulfill. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Morgan nodded slowly, still trying to wrap her head around the enormity of what was being proposed. "And the child? What would happen after?" "The child would be raised as my heir," Alexander said firmly. "You would sign away all parental rights. Your involvement would end with the birth." The words hit Morgan like a physical blow. The idea of carrying a child for 9 months only to hand it over and never see it again, it seemed unthinkable. And yet, as the image of her mother's gaunt face flashed through her mind, she knew she couldn't dismiss the offer outright. I need time to think," she said finally, rising from her chair on shaky legs. Alexander nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Take a few days. But remember, Ms. Hayes, discretion is paramount. I trust you understand the sensitive nature of this proposal." Morgan nodded, her mind already racing with the implications. As she left the study, she felt as though she were walking in a dream, the world around her slightly out of focus. The next few days passed in a blur for Morgan. By day, she went through the motions of her work, cleaning and tidying with mechanical precision. But her mind was elsewhere, constantly turning over Alexander's proposition, weighing the pros and cons, trying to reconcile the idea with her own moral compass. In the evenings, she would visit her mother in the hospital, the harsh fluorescent lights throwing the older woman's gaunt features into sharp relief. Sarah Hayes had once been a vibrant, energetic woman, full of laughter and life. Now, ravaged by illness, she was a shadow of her former self. But her eyes still lit up when Morgan walked into the room, and her smile was as warm as ever. "There's my girl," Sarah said, reaching out a thin hand to clasp Morgan's. "How was work today, sweetheart?" Morgan forced a smile, pushing down the tumult of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "It was fine, Mom, just the usual." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "You look tired, honey. Are you getting enough rest?" "I'm fine, Mom," Morgan assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "Don't worry about me. How are you feeling today?" As her mother launched into a detailed account of her day, peppered with gentle complaints about the hospital food and fond mentions of her favorite nurses, Morgan found her mind drifting back to Alexander's offer. $5 million. It was more money than she could even fathom. Enough to pay for her mother's treatment, to ensure she got the best care possible, enough to secure their future, to lift the crushing weight of financial worry from their shoulders. But the cost... Morgan's hand drifted unconsciously to her flat stomach. Could she really carry a child for 9 months, knowing she would have to give it up? Could she live with herself, knowing she had brought a life into the world, only to hand it over to a man who viewed parenthood as a business transaction? As the days passed, Morgan found herself watching Alexander more closely during her work hours. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The slight furrow of his brow when he was deep in thought, the rare quirk of his lips that might have been a smile in another man. She began to wonder about the events that had shaped him, that had led him to make such an unconventional proposal. It was during one of these moments of observation that Morgan overheard a conversation that shed some light on Alexander's past. She was dusting in the hallway outside his office when the door opened, and a tall, elegantly dressed woman swept out, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "You can't keep pushing everyone away, Alex," the woman hissed, her voice low but intense. "Sooner or later you're going to have to let someone in." Alexander's reply was cool, controlled. "I appreciate your concern, Victoria, but my personal life is not up for discussion. I've made my decision." As the woman, Victoria, stormed off, Morgan couldn't help but notice the flicker of emotion that crossed Alexander's face. For a brief moment, he looked tired, vulnerable even. But then the mask slipped back into place, and he was once again the cold, implacable businessman she had always known. Curiosity piqued, Morgan began to discreetly ask questions of the other staff members. Bit by bit, a picture began to emerge. Alexander Hawkins, it seemed, had not always been the emotionless automaton he appeared to be. There had been a time, not so long ago, when he had been engaged to be married. Her name was Serenity, a woman of breathtaking beauty and impeccable social standing. They had seemed the perfect couple, right up until the moment Serenity had betrayed him in the most painful way possible. The details were hazy, cloaked in the secrecy that surrounded all things related to Alexander's personal life. But the impact was clear. Since the end of that relationship, Alexander had retreated further into himself, throwing himself into his work with a single-minded intensity that both impressed and alarmed those around him. As Morgan pieced together this history, she began to see Alexander in a new light. The cold exterior, the obsession with control, it all stemmed from a deep-seated fear of being hurt again. In a strange way, she found herself empathizing with him. Hadn't she built her own walls, focused solely on her mother's care and her own survival, to the exclusion of all else? It was this newfound understanding that finally tipped the scales for Morgan. On the 5th day after Alexander's proposal, she found herself once again standing outside his study, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Come in," Alexander called in response to her knock. Morgan stepped into the room, her back straight, her chin lifted. Alexander looked up from his desk, his eyebrows raising slightly at her determined expression. "I've made my decision, Mr. Hawkins," Morgan said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I accept your offer." Alexander nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I see. And you're certain about this, Ms. Hayes? You understand all that it entails?" Morgan took a deep breath. "I do. I've thought about it carefully and I'm ready to proceed." "Very well," Alexander said, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a thick folder. "These are the contracts. I suggest you review them carefully with a lawyer before signing." As Morgan took the folder, her fingers brushed against Alexander's. For a moment their eyes met and she felt a jolt of something. Not quite attraction, not quite connection, but possibility. The hint of a future neither of them could have anticipated. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Morgan met with lawyers, underwent medical examinations, and began the process of preparing her body for pregnancy. Through it all, she maintained her work at the mansion, though her interactions with Alexander took on a new, charged quality. There was an awareness between them now, a shared secret that set them apart from everyone else in the household. It was during one of her medical appointments that Morgan received unexpected news. "Dr. Elena Fernandez, A kind-faced woman with a no-nonsense demeanor looked up from her chart with a slight frown. "Ms. Hayes," she said, her tone careful, "I have some interesting results here. It appears that your chances of natural conception are actually quite high. Higher than we initially thought, in fact." Morgan blinked, taken aback. "What does that mean exactly?" Dr. Fernandez leaned forward, her expression serious. "It means that artificial insemination might not be necessary. You and Mr. Hawkins could potentially conceive through more traditional means." The implication hung in the air, causing Morgan's cheeks to flush. "Oh," she said softly, her mind reeling with the possibilities. When she relayed this information to Alexander later that day, she was surprised by his reaction. Instead of the clinical detachment she had come to expect, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Interest, anticipation. "I see," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "And what are your thoughts on this development, Ms. Hayes?" Morgan swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of the man before her, not as her employer, not as the father of her future child, but as a flesh and blood human being. I'm open to whatever you think is best, Mr. Hawkins." Alexander nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Then perhaps we should consider a more natural approach. It would certainly increase our chances of success." As Morgan left Alexander's study that evening, her head spinning with the implications of their conversation, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The lines between employer and employee, between business arrangement and intimate connection, were beginning to blur. And as frightening as that was, a small part of her couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement at what the future might hold. Little did she know, forces were already in motion that would test the boundaries of their arrangement in ways neither of them could have anticipated. As Morgan walked down the hallway, lost in thought, she failed to notice the sleek, expensive car pulling up the driveway. Inside sat a woman with eyes like green ice and a smile that could cut glass. Serenity had returned, and she was about to throw Morgan and Alexander's carefully constructed world into chaos. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls of Alexander's private suite. Morgan stood near the window, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the cool glass as she gazed out at the moonlit gardens below. Her heart thundered in her chest, a mix of anticipation and nervousness coursing through her veins. Behind her, she heard the soft clink of ice against crystal as Alexander poured himself a drink. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken thoughts and expectations. "Are you sure you're comfortable with this, Ms. Hayes?" Alexander's voice cut through the quiet, startling Morgan from her reverie. She turned to face him, taking in the sight of Alexander Hawkins in a more relaxed state than she'd ever seen him. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. In the warm light, his usually stern features seemed softer, more human. "Yes," Morgan replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I'm sure." Alexander nodded, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Very well. Shall we begin?" The clinical nature of his words should have been off-putting, but Morgan found herself oddly touched by his attempt at consideration. She took a deep breath and stepped towards him, closing the distance between them. What followed was a dance of awkward fumbling and tentative touches. So far removed from the passionate encounters, Morgan had imagined that she almost wanted to laugh. Alexander's hands, usually so sure and confident in the boardroom, seemed unsure as they skimmed over her skin. His kisses were measured, controlled, as if he were afraid of losing himself in the moment. But as the night wore on, something began to shift. A spark ignited between them, growing from a flicker to a steady flame. Morgan found herself responding to Alexander's touch with increasing enthusiasm, her body arching into his, seeking more. And Alexander began to let his carefully constructed walls crumble, bit by bit. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, Morgan felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. So why did her heart race every time Alexander's hand brushed against her skin? Why did she feel the urge to reach out and smooth the furrow from his brow as he slept? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and contradictions. By day, Morgan continued her duties as a maid, cleaning and tidying with the same efficiency as always. But now every interaction with Alexander was charged with an undercurrent of awareness. A lingering glance across a room, a brush of hands as she served his coffee. Each moment felt loaded with meaning. Their nights together grew more frequent, and with each encounter, the lines between their arrangement and something more blurred further. Alexander's touch became more confident, more passionate. Morgan found herself looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. It was during one of these nights, as they lay in the afterglow of their lovemaking, that Alexander's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "I never wanted this," he murmured, his voice so low Morgan had to strain to hear him. "A family, children. It was never part of my plan." Morgan propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face in the dim light. What changed? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. When he spoke, his voice was tinged with a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "I realized that without an heir, everything I've built would be meaningless. All the long hours, the sacrifices. What's the point if there's no one to carry on the legacy?" Morgan felt a pang in her chest at the loneliness in his words. Hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. "Is that all a child means to you? A legacy?" Alexander turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "It's all it can mean. Anything more is dangerous." "Dangerous?" Morgan prompted softly. Alexander sighed, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was a haunted look in their depths. "My parents, they weren't exactly the warm and fuzzy type. My father saw me as nothing more than a continuation of the Hawking's name. My mother, well, she was more interested in her social life than in raising a child." As Alexander spoke, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place for Morgan. His cold demeanor, his obsession with control, it all stemmed from a childhood devoid of genuine affection. "And then there was Serenity," Alexander continued, his voice hardening. I actually believed she loved me for who I was, not what I could give her. I was a fool." Morgan's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "What happened?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "She was sleeping with my best friend, had been for months apparently. They were planning to take me for everything I was worth in the divorce. If I hadn't caught them..." He trailed off, his jaw clenching at the memory. Without thinking, Morgan reached out, her hand covering his. "I'm so sorry, Alexander. You didn't deserve that." For a moment, Alexander tensed at her touch. Then, slowly, he relaxed, his fingers intertwining with hers. They lay like that for a long while, the silence between them more comforting than any words could have been. As the weeks turned into months, Morgan found herself falling deeper into a world she never thought she'd be a part of. She attended charity galas on Alexander's arm, learning to navigate the treacherous waters of high society. She sat in on business meetings, her quick mind and fresh perspective earning her grudging respect from Alexander's associates. And through it all she watched Alexander, learning to read the micro-expressions that flitted across his face, understanding the weight behind each carefully chosen word. She saw the loneliness that haunted him, the fear of betrayal that kept him isolated even in a crowded room. But she also saw glimpses of the man he could be, the dry wit that emerged in unguarded moments, the passion that burned in his eyes when he spoke of his latest project, the gentleness in his touch when he thought she was asleep. It was during one of these society events that their carefully constructed world began to unravel. Morgan was at the bar, waiting for a drink, when a voice behind her made her blood run cold. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Morgan turned to find herself face to face with a woman of breathtaking beauty. Golden hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and eyes the color of jade sparkled with malicious amusement. "You must be the latest charity case," the woman purred, her gaze raking over Morgan's form. "Tell me, dear, does Alexander still have that adorable little birthmark on his left hip?" Morgan felt as though she'd been doused in ice water. This could only be one person, Serenity, Alexander's ex-fiancée, the woman who had broken his heart and shattered his trust. Before Morgan could formulate a response, she felt a presence at her back. Alexander's hand came to rest on her waist, a possessive gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "Serenity," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze hell itself. "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." Serenity's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, darling, you know I always find a way in, especially when I hear such interesting rumors." Her gaze flicked meaningfully to Alexander's hand on Morgan's waist, then to Morgan's still flat stomach. Morgan felt her cheeks burn with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "If you'll excuse us," Alexander said, his tone brooking no argument. He steered Morgan away, his grip on her waist almost painfully tight. As soon as they were out of earshot, Morgan turned to him. "Alexander, Not here," he cut her off, his eyes scanning the room. "We'll discuss this at home." The ride back to the mansion was tense, the silence between them oppressive. As soon as they were behind closed doors, Alexander rounded on her. "What did she say to you?" he demanded, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. Morgan took a step back, startled by the intensity of his reaction. "Nothing, really. She implied that she knew about our arrangement." Alexander's face darkened. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I should have known she'd find out. Serenity has always had a talent for digging up secrets." "Alexander," Morgan said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "It's okay. We haven't done anything wrong." He jerked away from her touch, his eyes wild. "You don't understand. Serenity. She'll use this. She'll twist it, make it into something sordid. She'll ruin you, Morgan, just like she tried to ruin me." The use of her first name, so rare from his lips, made Morgan's heart skip a beat. "I'm not afraid of her," she said firmly. "Let her try. We know the truth." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, without warning, he pulled her to him, his lips crashing down on hers in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and need. Morgan responded instinctively, her arms winding around his neck as she melted into him. This wasn't like their usual encounters, controlled, measured. This was raw, passionate, a release of all the pent-up emotions they'd been holding back. Later, as they lay tangled together, Morgan traced idle patterns on Alexander's chest. "We'll figure this out," she murmured. "Together." Alexander was quiet for so long that Morgan thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he whispered, "I don't want to lose you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to face. As the days passed, Morgan found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, half expecting Serenity to pop up at every turn. But life at the mansion continued much as it always had, with one significant difference. Alexander seemed to be withdrawing from her. Their nightly encounters became less frequent, and when they did happen they felt mechanical, devoid of the warmth and passion that had been growing between them. During the day, Alexander was distant, burying himself in work and barely acknowledging Morgan's presence. It was maddening, and Morgan found herself torn between anger at his behavior and worry for what it might mean. Had Serenity's reappearance scared him off? Had she said something to him, planted doubts in his mind? The tension came to a head one evening as Morgan was preparing to leave for the day. She bumped into Alexander in the hallway, quite literally, sending the stack of papers he was carrying scattering across the floor. "I'm so sorry," Morgan exclaimed, immediately dropping to her knees to help gather the documents. "Leave it," Alexander snapped, his voice harsh. "I'll take care of it." Morgan froze, stung by his tone. Slowly she rose to her feet, meeting his gaze defiantly. "What's going on, Alexander? Why are you pushing me away?" For a moment something like pain flashed across his face. Then his expression hardened. "I'm not pushing you away, Ms. Hayes. I'm simply maintaining appropriate boundaries." The use of her formal title felt like a slap in the face. "Appropriate boundaries," Morgan repeated incredulously. "After everything we've been through, after everything we've shared, you're going to hide behind appropriate boundaries?" Alexander's jaw clenched. "Our arrangement was clear from the beginning. There's no need to complicate things with unnecessary emotions." Morgan felt as though the wind had been knocked out of her. "Unnecessary emotions," she echoed hollowly. "Is that what you think this is?" Before Alexander could respond, Morgan felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth as she fought the urge to be sick. In an instant, Alexander's cold demeanor vanished, replaced by concern. He reached out to steady her, his touch gentle. "Morgan, are you all right?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Alexander guided her to a nearby chair, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back as she took deep breaths. When the nausea finally passed, Morgan looked up to find Alexander watching her with an unreadable expression. "How long has this been happening?" he asked quietly. Morgan swallowed hard. "A few days," she admitted. "I thought it was just stress, but—" Alexander nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. We should make an appointment with Dr. Fernandez to be sure. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Morgan found herself hyper-aware of every twinge, every flutter in her body. And Alexander seemed to be waging an internal battle, alternating between solicitous concern and distant professionalism. Finally, the day of the appointment arrived. As they sat in Dr. Fernandez's office, waiting for the results, Morgan felt as though she might vibrate out of her skin with nervous energy. Alexander sat beside her, outwardly calm, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed an erratic rhythm on the armrest of his chair. When Dr. Fernandez entered the room, her face wreathed in a warm smile, Morgan knew before she even spoke. "Congratulations," the doctor said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "You're pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications and unspoken emotions. Morgan turned to Alexander, her heart pounding, unsure of what she would see in his face. What she saw took her breath away. For a brief moment, the mask slipped, and she saw a kaleidoscope of emotions play across Alexander's features. Joy, fear, wonder, and something that looked suspiciously like love. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by his usual composed expression. But Morgan had seen it, that flash of raw emotion, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same between them again. As they left the doctor's office, Morgan's hand unconsciously drifted to her still flat stomach. A life was growing inside her. A life created from this complex, messy, beautiful tangle of arrangements and unexpected feelings. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Serenity or anyone else might throw their way, Morgan knew one thing for certain. This child, conceived in a business arrangement, but nurtured in growing affection, would be loved, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would be the key to unlocking the frozen chambers of Alexander Hawking's heart. The gentle morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of Morgan's bedroom, casting a soft glow over her sleeping form. As consciousness slowly crept in, she became aware of a warm presence beside her. Opening her eyes, she found Alexander watching her, his gaze soft and unguarded, in a way she'd rarely seen. "Good morning," she murmured, a small smile playing on her lips. Alexander's hand moved to rest on the slight swell of her stomach, now visible at 4 months pregnant. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. This had become their new normal over the past few months, stolen moments of tenderness in the early hours before the rest of the world intruded. It was in these quiet moments that Morgan allowed herself to hope, to imagine a future where their arrangement had blossomed into something more. "We're good," Morgan replied, placing her hand over his, "though your child seems to think my bladder is a squeeze toy." A chuckle escaped Alexander, the sound warming Morgan from the inside out. These glimpses of the man behind the mask were becoming more frequent, and each one made her fall a little deeper. As they lay there, basking in the peaceful morning, Morgan couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The cold, clinical nature of their initial arrangement had given way to something softer, warmer. Alexander had become attentive, almost hovering at times, his concern for her well-being evident in every action. But with this new closeness came new complications. Morgan found herself struggling with the knowledge that, in just a few short months, she would have to give up the child growing inside her. Every kick, every flutter, forged a bond that she knew would be agonizing to break. And Alexander was a study in contradictions. One moment he would be touching her stomach with wonder in his eyes, talking softly to their unborn child. The next he would withdraw, his expression clouding over, as if remembering the temporary nature of their situation. Their idyllic morning was interrupted by the shrill ring of Alexander's phone. His expression hardened as he glanced at the screen, and Morgan felt the familiar pang of loss as his walls slammed back into place. "Hawkins," he answered, his voice clipped and professional. As he listened to the caller, his frown deepened. "I see. No, that won't be necessary. I'll handle it personally." Ending the call, Alexander turned to Morgan, his expression unreadable. "I have to go into the office. There's a situation that requires my attention." Morgan nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. Will you be back for dinner?" Alexander hesitated, something flickering in his eyes. "I'm not sure. Don't wait up." With that, he was gone, leaving Morgan alone with her swirling thoughts and emotions. As the day wore on, Morgan found herself restless, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. She puttered around the mansion, straightening things that didn't need straightening, her mind racing with possibilities. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. Curious, Morgan made her way to the entrance hall, only to freeze in her tracks at the sight of the woman standing on the doorstep. Serenity. The blonde's lips curved into a predatory smile as she took in Morgan's appearance, her gaze lingering on the visible baby bump. Well, well, looks like the rumors were true after all. Morgan straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. Can I help you with something, Ms.? Oh, darling, I think we're past such formalities, don't you? Serenity purred, brushing past Morgan and into the house as if she owned it. After all, we have so much in common. Tell me, how are you enjoying my sloppy seconds? The crude words hit Morgan like a physical blow, but she refused to show weakness. I think you should leave, she said firmly. Serenity's laugh was like shards of glass. Leave? Oh no, sweetheart, I'm just getting started. She moved further into the house, her fingers trailing over surfaces as if reclaiming lost territory. You know, I always wondered what kind of woman would agree to be Alexander's broodmare. I must say, you're not quite what I expected. Morgan felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and shame. You don't know anything about me or my relationship with Alexander. Relationship? Serenity's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Is that what you think this is? Oh, honey, let me give you a piece of advice. Alexander Hawkins doesn't do relationships. He does transactions. And once he's gotten what he wants, she made a dismissive gesture. Well, let's just say I hope you negotiated a good severance package. Before Morgan could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Serenity. Both women turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Morgan felt a wave of relief wash over her, quickly followed by confusion. Why was he home so early? Serenity's face lit up with malicious glee. Alex, perfect timing. I was just getting to know your little project here. Alexander moved to stand between Morgan and Serenity, his posture protective. I thought I made it clear that you were no longer welcome here. Oh, come now, Serenity pouted. Is that any way to treat an old friend? Especially one who's come bearing such interesting information. She pulled an envelope from her purse, waving it tantalizingly. You might want to take a look at this, Alex. It seems your little broodmare isn't quite as innocent as she appears. Morgan felt her blood run cold. What could Serenity possibly have dug up? Alexander's jaw clenched. Whatever game you're playing, Serenity, I'm not interested. No? Serenity's smile was razor-sharp. Not even if it involves your precious arrangement being splashed across every tabloid in the country? I wonder how your shareholders would react to that. For a long moment the room was silent, tension crackling in the air. Then, with a resigned sigh, Alexander held out his hand. Give it to me. Alexander, no, Morgan protested, but it was too late. Serenity had already handed over the envelope, a look of triumph on her face. As Alexander opened the envelope and began to read, Morgan felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had nothing to hide, she knew that, but the look of growing anger on Alexander's face told her that whatever was in that envelope was bad news. Finally, Alexander looked up, his eyes cold as he turned to Morgan. Is this true? Morgan swallowed hard. Is what true, Alexander? I don't know what's in that envelope, but whatever it is, don't. Alexander cut her off, his voice harsh. Don't lie to me, Morgan. Not now. He thrust the papers at her. Did you or did you not meet with Jason Reeves last week? Morgan felt the blood drain from her face as she scanned the documents. There were photos of her meeting with Jason, her old friend from college who now worked as a journalist. The meeting had been innocent. Jason had reached out, saying he was in town and wanted to catch up, but the photos taken out of context painted a different picture. Alexander, it's not what it looks like, Morgan began, her voice shaking. Jason is an old friend, we were just catching up. An old friend who happens to be an investigative journalist? Alexander's laugh was bitter. Do you really expect me to believe that? Serenity watched the exchange with undisguised glee. Oh, this is even better than I hoped, she murmured. Morgan felt tears pricking at her eyes. Alexander, please, you have to believe me. I would never betray you like that. For a moment, something flickered in Alexander's eyes, a hint of the warmth and trust that had been growing between them, but then his gaze hardened once more. I think you should go, Morgan. We'll discuss this later. The dismissal felt like a physical blow. Morgan opened her mouth to protest, to fight for what they had been building, but the cold look in Alexander's eyes stopped her. With a heavy heart, she turned and left the room, Serenity's triumphant laughter echoing in her ears. As the weeks passed, the rift between Morgan and Alexander grew wider. He threw himself into work, often not returning to the mansion until the early hours of the morning. When they did interact, his responses were curt, his demeanor cold. Morgan, for her part, found herself torn between anger at Alexander's lack of trust and a deep, aching sadness for what they had lost. She tried multiple times to explain the situation with Jason, but Alexander refused to listen, his fear of betrayal overriding any logic or reason. As her pregnancy progressed, Morgan found herself increasingly isolated. The staff, picking up on the tension between her and Alexander, kept their distance. Her only solace came in the quiet moments when she was alone, talking softly to the child growing inside her, promising love and protection even as she knew she would have to give the baby up. It was during one of these moments, as Morgan sat in the nursery Alexander had commissioned before their falling out, that she made a decision. She couldn't continue like this. The stress and emotional turmoil weren't good for her or the baby. With a heavy heart, she began to pack her things. As she was zipping up her suitcase, a knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, hastily wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper who had been a quiet source of support throughout Morgan's time at the mansion. The older woman took in the packed suitcase with a sad smile. "Going somewhere, dear?" Morgan nodded, her throat tight. "I think it's for the best, Mrs. Henderson. I can't stay here anymore." Mrs. Henderson moved into the room, her kind eyes filled with understanding. "Before you go, there's something you should know." She pulled an envelope from her apron pocket. "This came for Mr. Hawkins today. I may have taken a peek." Morgan's brow furrowed as she took the envelope. Inside was a letter, the letterhead bearing the logo of a well-known private investigation firm. As she read, her eyes widened. The letter detailed the results of an investigation into Jason Reeves. It confirmed that he was indeed just an old friend, with no ulterior motives for meeting with Morgan. More importantly, it revealed that the photos Serenity had presented were heavily edited, taken out of context to paint a misleading picture. "He didn't trust me enough to just ask," Morgan murmured, hurt and anger warring in her chest. Mrs. Henderson placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Men can be fools, dear, especially when they're scared of getting hurt." Morgan looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "What do I do now?" The older woman smiled gently. "That's up to you, dear, but if I may offer some advice, don't let fear make your decisions for you, either of you." With those words ringing in her ears, Morgan made her way to Alexander's study. She found him there, hunched over his desk, looking more tired and haggard than she'd ever seen him. "Alexander," she said softly, causing him to look up in surprise. "Morgan, what are you—" His eyes fell on the suitcase in her hand, and something like panic flashed across his face. "You're leaving?" Morgan took a deep breath. "I was going to, but then I got some interesting information." She placed the investigation report on his desk. "You had me investigated?" Alexander's face paled. "Morgan, No," she cut him off. "Let me finish. You had me investigated instead of just talking to me. You let your fear and your past cloud your judgment. You pushed me away when I needed you most." Alexander's shoulders slumped. "I know, I'm sorry, Morgan. When Serenity showed up with those photos, all I could think about was how foolish I'd been before, how much it hurt to be betrayed. I couldn't bear the thought of going through that again." Morgan moved closer, her hand coming to rest on her swollen belly. "And what about now? Now that you know the truth?" Alexander looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Now? Now I realize that I've been a fool, that I've been pushing away the best thing that's ever happened to me because I was too scared to believe it could be real." He stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. Hesitantly, he reached out, his hand joining hers on her stomach. "I love you, Morgan. You and this baby. You're everything to me. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing to give me one—" Morgan cut him off with a kiss, pouring all her hurt, anger, and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you too, you stubborn, infuriating man," she murmured. "But if we're going to make this work, you have to trust me." No more investigations, no more listening to Serenity or anyone else. Just us, together. Alexander nodded, pulling her close. Just us, he agreed. I promise. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with their unborn child between them, both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still many obstacles to overcome. Serenity's machinations, the public scrutiny that would come when their arrangement inevitably became public knowledge, and their own fears and insecurities. But in that moment, with the truth finally laid bare and their hearts open to each other, Morgan and Alexander found a strength they hadn't known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Little did they know the greatest test of their newfound trust and love was just around the corner, one that would push them to their limits and force them to confront the true depth of their feelings for each other and the child they had created. The late summer sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Hawkins estate. Inside the mansion, an air of nervous anticipation permeated every room. Morgan, now in her 9th month of pregnancy, waddled through the halls, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other trailing along the wall for support. Alexander watched her from the doorway of his study, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure you don't want to rest?" he called out, his voice tinged with worry. Morgan turned, offering him a tired smile. "I'm fine, Alex. The doctor said walking might help bring on labor. And honestly, I'm ready for this little one to make their appearance." As if in agreement, a strong kick rippled across her stomach, visible even through her loose maternity dress. Alexander crossed the room in a few quick strides, his hand joining hers on her belly. The wonder in his eyes as he felt their child move never failed to make Morgan's heart swell with love. "Soon," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Very soon." The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. After their reconciliation, Alexander had thrown himself into getting ready for the baby's arrival with the same intensity he usually reserved for business deals. The nursery had been redesigned 3 times, each iteration more elaborate than the last. A team of the country's top pediatricians had been assembled and placed on call. Even the staff had undergone extensive training in newborn care. But beneath the flurry of activity, a current of tension still ran. Serenity's attempted sabotage had left its mark, despite their best efforts to move past it. Alexander was more protective than ever, rarely letting Morgan out of his sight. And Morgan, though touched by his concern, found herself chafing under the constant surveillance. More troubling were the nightmares that plagued her sleep. In them, she would give birth, only to have the baby snatched away before she could hold it. She would wake in a cold sweat, her arms aching with emptiness. On those nights, Alexander would hold her close, murmuring reassurances until she drifted back to sleep. But the fear lingered, a shadow at the edges of their happiness. As evening fell, Morgan and Alexander settled in the library for their nightly ritual. Alexander read aloud from a book of classic children's stories, his rich voice washing over Morgan as she reclined on the chaise lounge. It was in these quiet moments that Morgan allowed herself to imagine a future where this was their life, a family, whole and happy. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through Morgan's abdomen, causing her to gasp. Alexander was at her side in an instant, his face pale with concern. "Morgan, what is it? Is it time?" She nodded, gritting her teeth against another contraction. "I think so, but it's too early, Alex. We're not due for another 2 weeks." Alexander was already in motion, calling for the staff, his voice steady despite the panic Morgan could see in his eyes. "It's going to be all right," he assured her, helping her to her feet. "We're prepared for this. Everything's going to be fine." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and activity. Morgan was whisked to the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses descending upon her the moment they arrived. Alexander never left her side, his hand a constant anchor as she rode the waves of contractions. As dawn broke, painting the hospital room in soft hues of pink and gold, a new cry joined the chorus of beeping machines. Morgan collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated as the doctor placed a tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. "Congratulations," the doctor beamed. "You have a beautiful baby girl." Morgan looked down at her daughter, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. The baby's eyes, still unfocused, seemed to seek out her face. A tuft of dark hair, so like Alexander's, adorned her perfect little head. "She's amazing," Alexander breathed, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out, his large hand gently cradling their daughter's head. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." As Morgan watched Alexander with their child, she felt a surge of grief. In a few short days, she would have to say goodbye to this perfect little being they had created. The thought was almost unbearable. Sensing her distress, Alexander met her gaze, his eyes filled with an emotion Morgan couldn't quite name. "Morgan, But before he could finish, a commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Raised voices and the sound of running feet penetrated the peaceful bubble of their room. Alexander straightened, moving to the door with a frown. "Stay here," he instructed, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll see what's going on." As Alexander stepped into the hallway, Morgan held her daughter closer, an inexplicable sense of dread washing over her. The baby, sensing her mother's tension, began to fuss. "Shh, it's okay," Morgan soothed, even as her own heart raced. "Daddy will be back soon. Everything's fine." But even as the words left her mouth, Morgan knew they were a lie. Something was very, very wrong. Suddenly the door burst open. Morgan looked up, expecting to see Alexander, but instead found herself face to face with two masked figures. Before she could scream, one of them was upon her, a cloth pressed against her face. As the world began to fade to black, Morgan's last conscious thought was of her daughter, and a desperate prayer that Alexander would keep her safe. When Morgan came to, the first thing she registered was the pounding in her head. The second was the cold, hard surface beneath her. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, she struggled to sit up, her body protesting every movement. As her vision cleared, Morgan found herself in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. The cavernous space was mostly empty, save for a few rusty pieces of machinery and piles of debris. And there, in the center of it all, stood Serenity. The blonde woman's perfect features were twisted into a sneer as she regarded Morgan. "Well, well, Sleeping Beauty awakes. Where's my baby?" Morgan demanded, her voice hoarse. "What have you done with her?" Serenity's laugh was cold and brittle. "Your baby? Oh, darling. I think you mean Alexander's baby. After all, that was the agreement, wasn't it? You pop out a brat and then disappear." Morgan struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. "That agreement is null and void. Alexander and you what?" Serenity cut her off, her voice dripping with disdain. "Fell in love? Please. Alexander Hawkins doesn't know the meaning of the word. He's using you, just like he uses everyone, and once he has what he wants..." She made a dismissive gesture. "You're wrong," Morgan insisted, even as a tiny seed of doubt tried to take root in her heart. "Alexander loves me. He loves our daughter." Serenity's smile was razor sharp. "Does he now? Then I suppose he'll be quite motivated to meet my demands, won't he?" As if on cue, a baby's cry echoed through the warehouse. Morgan's heart leapt into her throat as she saw a man emerge from the shadows, carrying a small bundle. "My baby," she breathed, taking an involuntary step forward. Ah, Serenity warned, producing a gun from her designer handbag. "Not another step. You see, Morgan, this is how it's going to work. Alexander is going to transfer a very large sum of money into an offshore account. Once that's done, he gets the baby. And you? Well, let's just say you won't be a problem anymore." Morgan's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. "Why are you doing this, Serenity? What could you possibly gain?" For a moment, Serenity's perfect mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the pain and bitterness beneath. "Gain? I'm taking back what's rightfully mine. Alexander was supposed to be mine. That empire, that legacy, it was all supposed to be ours. And then you came along with your innocent act and your ability to give him the one thing I couldn't." Understanding dawned on Morgan. "You can't have children," she said softly. Serenity's face contorted with rage. "Shut up. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through. Alexander and I were perfect together. We understood each other. And then he threw it all away because of one little mistake." "Sleeping with his best friend wasn't a little mistake, Serenity." A new voice cut through the tension. "It was a betrayal." All heads turned to see Alexander striding into the warehouse, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, a team of what appeared to be private security fanned out, their weapons trained on Serenity and her accomplice. "Alex," Serenity purred, her demeanor shifting instantly. "So glad you could join us. I trust you've received my instructions?" Alexander's gaze swept the room, landing first on Morgan, then on the bundle containing his daughter. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "Let them go, Serenity. This is between you and me." Serenity's laugh was harsh. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, Alex, I hold all the cards here. One wrong move and, well," she gestured with the gun, the threat clear. For a moment, the warehouse was silent, save for the soft whimpers of the baby. Morgan's eyes met Alexander's, and in that instant a lifetime of understanding passed between them. With an almost imperceptible nod, Alexander turned his attention back to Serenity. "All right," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You win, Serenity. I'll transfer the money, just don't hurt them." As Alexander pulled out his phone, ostensibly to make the transfer, Morgan saw her chance. While Serenity was distracted, gloating over her apparent victory, Morgan lunged towards the man holding her daughter. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Serenity, realizing what was happening, swung her gun towards Morgan. Without hesitation, Morgan threw herself in front of her child, using her body as a shield. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the warehouse, followed by chaos. Alexander's security team swarmed in, disarming Serenity and her accomplice. But Alexander had eyes only for Morgan, who had crumpled to the ground, still curled protectively around their daughter. "Morgan!" he cried, falling to his knees beside her. "Morgan, please, open your eyes." Slowly, painfully, Morgan's eyes fluttered open. "The baby," she whispered. Alexander gently took their daughter from her arms, checking her over with trembling hands. "She's fine," he assured Morgan, tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect. You saved her." Morgan managed a weak smile. "Good," she murmured, her eyes beginning to drift closed again. "No, no, no," Alexander pleaded, cradling her face in his hand. "Stay with me, Morgan. Please, I can't lose you. I love you." As the sound of sirens filled the air and paramedics rushed in, Alexander held Morgan close, whispering a litany of pleas and promises. Their daughter, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her, nestled against her father's chest, her tiny hand gripping his shirt as if she'd never let go. The next few hours were a blur of ambulance rides, emergency rooms, and tense waiting. Alexander paced the hospital corridor, their daughter held securely in his arms, as doctors worked to save Morgan's life. It was in those agonizing hours of uncertainty that Alexander Hawkins, a man who had built his life on control and careful planning, found himself utterly helpless. As he looked down at the tiny, perfect face of his daughter, he was struck by a realization that shook him to his core. This fragile, beautiful life in his arms, and the brave, incredible woman fighting for her life in the operating room, this was what mattered. Not his empire, not his carefully cultivated image, not the legacy he had been so obsessed with continuing. Morgan and their daughter were his legacy, his future, his everything. As dawn broke, casting a pale golden light through the hospital windows, a doctor emerged from the operating room. Alexander stood, his heart in his throat, waiting for news that would either shatter his world or give him hope. "Mr. Hawkins," the doctor began, his face unreadable, "your wife is out of surgery. The bullet missed any vital organs, but she lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Alexander sagged with relief, tears springing to his eyes. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "She's being moved to recovery now. You can sit with her, but she'll be unconscious for a while yet." As Alexander was led to Morgan's room, their daughter still cradled in his arms, he felt a surge of determination. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges they faced, he would be there. No more running, no more hiding behind walls of fear and distrust. Morgan had risked everything for their child, for their family. Now it was his turn to be brave. Entering the recovery room, Alexander's breath caught in his throat. Morgan lay still and pale against the white hospital sheets, a myriad of tubes and wires connecting her to softly beeping machines. She looked small and fragile, so unlike the vibrant, strong woman he had fallen in love with. Gently, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby, Alexander lowered himself into the chair beside Morgan's bed. With his free hand, he reached out, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I'm here, Morgan," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're both here and we're not going anywhere, you hear me? You fight, you come back to us." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the room in warm light, Alexander Hawkins settled in for the longest wait of his life. In one arm he held his sleeping daughter, a testament to the love he and Morgan had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. With his other hand, he clung to Morgan, willing her to feel his presence, his love, his desperate need for her to wake up. Outside the hospital room, the world continued to turn. News of the kidnapping and dramatic rescue spread like wildfire, setting off a media frenzy. Serenity and her accomplices were taken into custody, facing a litany of charges. The story of the billionaire, the surrogate, and the baby born of an unconventional arrangement captivated the public imagination. But inside that quiet hospital room, none of that mattered. A family hung in the balance, their future uncertain, but their love unshakable. As Alexander kept his vigil, he found himself doing something he hadn't done since he was a child. He prayed, not to any specific deity, but to the universe at large, to whatever forces might be listening. "Please," he whispered, his words meant for Morgan's unhearing ears. "Please come back to us. We need you. I need you. I love you more than I ever thought possible. Just open your eyes. Give me a chance to show you, to make things right. We'll face whatever comes next together, I promise. Just please, Morgan, please wake up." As the hours ticked by, Alexander's world narrowed to the steady rise and fall of Morgan's chest, the soft cooing sounds of their daughter, and the ceaseless beeping of the monitors that told him Morgan was still fighting. And in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the trappings of modern medicine, Alexander Hawkins learned the true meaning of faith, hope, and love. The future stretched out before them, uncertain and fraught with challenges. But for now, in this moment, Alexander held on to hope with both hands, waiting for the moment when Morgan's eyes would open and their new life, their real life, could truly begin. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the hospital room, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between life and death. Alexander Hawkins sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Morgan's bed, his usually impeccable appearance now disheveled from days of worry and sleepless nights. Their daughter, nestled in a portable crib nearby, slept peacefully, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Alexander's eyes never left Morgan's face, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that she might be waking up. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, but as the hours stretched into days, Alexander felt his hope wavering. He held her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, willing her to feel his presence, his love. "Come on, Morgan," he whispered, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "You've got to wake up. We need you. I need you." As if in response to his plea, Morgan's fingers twitched in his grasp. Alexander's breath caught in his throat, his heart racing. "Morgan," he called, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" Slowly, painfully, Morgan's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze, unfocused at first, gradually settled on Alexander's face. "Alex," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Relief washed over Alexander like a tidal wave. "I'm here," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I'm right here, Morgan. You're safe. You're going to be okay." Morgan's brow furrowed as memories began to surface. "The baby?" she asked, panic edging into her voice. "She's fine," Alexander assured her quickly. "She's right here, sleeping. You saved her, Morgan. You were so brave." At the mention of their daughter, Morgan's eyes filled with tears. "Can I see her?" Alexander nodded, carefully lifting their sleeping daughter from the crib and bringing her to Morgan's bedside. As Morgan gazed at their child, a look of pure love and wonder spreading across her face, Alexander felt his heart swell with an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. "She's perfect," Morgan whispered, reaching out a shaky hand to stroke the baby's cheek. "Just like her mother," Alexander replied softly. Morgan looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Alex, what happens now?" Alexander took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would define their future. "Now," he said, his voice filled with determination, "now we be a family, if that's what you want." Morgan's eyes widened in surprise. "But the contract, your plans—" "Forget the contract," Alexander said firmly. "Forget all of it. Morgan, these past few days, waiting to see if you'd wake up, they've been the worst of my life. I realize something. All the money, all the power, all the carefully laid plans, none of it means anything without you. You and our daughter, you're everything to me." Tears spilled down Morgan's cheeks as she listened to Alexander's words. "Do you really mean that?" Alexander nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I do. I love you, Morgan. I love our daughter. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." Morgan's face broke into a radiant smile, despite her weakened state. "I love you too, Alex. So much." As they shared this moment of pure, unguarded emotion, their daughter stirred in Alexander's arms, her tiny face scrunching up as she prepared to cry. Without thinking, Alexander gently bounced her, murmuring soothing words. Morgan watched in amazement as the once stoic businessman transformed before her eyes into a doting father. "She needs a name," she said softly. Alexander looked up, a smile playing on his lips. "I was thinking, hope, because that's what she's given us. A new hope, a new beginning." "Hope," Morgan repeated, tasting the name. "It's perfect." As the newly named Hope settled back into sleep, a knock at the door interrupted their moment. A nurse entered, followed by a police detective. "Mr. Hawkins, Miss Hayes," the detective greeted them. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I have some news regarding Serenity Williams and her accomplices." Alexander's arm tightened protectively around Hope as he turned to face the detective. "Go on," he said, his voice tense. "They've all been formally charged," the detective informed them. "Kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy, the list goes on. Given the evidence we've gathered and the high-profile nature of the case, the prosecutor is confident they'll be serving significant prison time." Morgan let out a shaky breath, relief evident on her face. "So it's over? They can't hurt us anymore?" The detective nodded. "It's over. You're safe now." As the detective left, Alexander turned back to Morgan, his expression serious. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so blind, so stubborn—" Morgan reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Alex, stop. We both made mistakes. What matters is that we're here now, together." Alexander nodded, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Together," he repeated. "And I promise you, Morgan, I will spend every day making sure you and Hope are safe and happy." Over the next few weeks, as Morgan recovered and they adjusted to life as new parents, Alexander was true to his word. He was there for every feeding, every diaper change, every sleepless night. The staff at the mansion were amazed at the transformation in their usually aloof employer. One evening, as they sat in the nursery, Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, Alexander broached a subject that had been on his mind. "Morgan," he began, his voice hesitant, "there's something I need to do, and I'd like you to be there with me." Curiosity piqued, Morgan nodded. "Of course, what is it?" Alexander stood, offering her his hand. "Come with me to my study. I'll show you." In the study, Alexander led Morgan to his desk. There, laid out neatly, were the contracts that had started their unconventional journey together. Morgan's breath caught in her throat at the sight of them. "These contracts," Alexander said, his voice filled with emotion, "they represent everything I got wrong. My fear of commitment, my inability to trust, my misguided attempt to control every aspect of my life, including the creation of my heir." He picked up the stack of papers, holding them out to Morgan. "I want us to destroy them together, to symbolize the end of that chapter and the beginning of our real life together." Tears welled up in Morgan's eyes as she took her half of the contracts. Together they fed the papers into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the last remnants of their business arrangement. As the last page curled and blackened in the fire, Alexander turned to Morgan, taking both her hands in his. "Morgan Hayes," he said, his voice filled with love and certainty. "Will you marry me? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you and our daughter?" Morgan's face lit up with joy. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Alexander Hawkins, I will marry you." Their kiss was sweet and tender, filled with promise for the future. As they broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, the baby monitor on Alexander's desk crackled to life with the sound of Hope's cries. "Duty calls," Morgan said with a smile. Alexander grinned, taking her hand as they made their way to the nursery. "I wouldn't have it any other way." In the weeks and months that followed, Alexander and Morgan settled into their new life as a family. The media frenzy surrounding their unusual story eventually died down, replaced by occasional society page mentions of the Hawkins family's charitable works and business successes. Alexander, true to his word, became a devoted father and partner. He scaled back his work hours, delegating more responsibilities to his trusted team so he could be present for his family. The staff at the mansion, once wary of the cold and demanding Mr. Hawkins, now marveled at the warmth and laughter that filled the once austere halls. Morgan, for her part, flourished in her new role. She threw herself into motherhood with the same determination and love that had characterized her care for her own mother. But she didn't stop there. With Alexander's encouragement, she went back to school, finishing the degree she had put on hold to care for her mother. She also became involved in charities supporting single mothers and children in need, using her own experiences to make a difference in others' lives. As Hope grew from a newborn to a curious, energetic toddler, Alexander and Morgan's love deepened and matured. They faced the challenges of parenthood together, learning and growing with each passing day. On the evening of Hope's first birthday, after a day filled with celebration and joy, Alexander and Morgan stood on the balcony of their bedroom, looking out over the moonlit gardens. Hope was asleep in her room, monitored by the state-of-the-art system Alexander had insisted on installing. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Morgan mused, leaning back against Alexander's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "In some ways, it feels like just yesterday. In others, it's like I can't remember what life was like before you and Hope." Morgan turned in his embrace, looking up into his eyes. "Any regrets?" Alexander's gaze was steady and full of love as he answered, "Only that it took me so long to realize what was right in front of me. You and Hope, you're the best things that ever happened to me." As they stood there, basking in the quiet moment of connection, both reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a cold business arrangement to a love that had overcome every obstacle, their story was one of growth, forgiveness, and the transformative power of love. "What do you think the future holds?" Morgan asked softly. Alexander smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know," he admitted, "and for once in my life, I'm okay with that. As long as I have you and Hope by my side, I'm ready for whatever comes next." Morgan stood on her tiptoes, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. "Together," she whispered. "Together," Alexander echoed, sealing the promise with another kiss. As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. The contract that had brought them together was long gone, replaced by something far more powerful and enduring. A love born of choice, nurtured through adversity, and strengthened by the bonds of family. In the quiet of the night, as Hope slept peacefully and her parents held each other close, the Hawkins household was filled with a sense of contentment and hope for the future. It was a future that neither Morgan nor Alexander could have imagined when they first met, but one they now embraced with open hearts and unwavering commitment. Their story, unconventional as it was, had become a testament to the idea that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that even the most guarded hearts can be opened by the power of trust, forgiveness, and the transformative magic of creating a family together. As the moon cast its gentle light over the sleeping mansion, it illuminated not just a house, but a home, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of many happy years to come. For Alexander, Morgan, and little Hope Hawkins, this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet, the adventure of being a family. The sun-dappled leaves of Central Park rustled gently in the late summer breeze, nature's own applause for the intimate gathering beneath the old oak tree. It was here 5 years ago that Morgan and Alexander had shared their first real date, awkwardly navigating the shift from their clinical arrangement to something more genuine. Now they stood in the same spot, surrounded by a small group of loved ones ready to cement their journey with wedding vows. Alexander watched with awe as Morgan approached, radiant in a simple white sundress. Their daughter Hope, now a precocious 4-year-old, skipped ahead, tossing flower petals with gleeful abandon. The sight of them, his family, made Alexander's heart swell with an emotion he once would have run from, but now embraced wholeheartedly. As Morgan reached him, Alexander took her hands in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Morgan's smile was radiant. "You don't look so bad yourself, Mr. Hawkins." The officiant, a kindly older woman who had been Morgan's literature professor in college, began the ceremony. As she spoke of love, commitment, and the journey that had brought them to this moment, Alexander found his mind wandering over the past 5 years. He thought of the sleepless nights when Hope was a newborn, how he and Morgan had taken turns pacing the nursery, singing off-key lullabies. He remembered the first time Hope had called him Dada, how his heart had nearly burst with pride and love. He recalled the challenges they'd faced, the public scrutiny, the whispers and judgments from those who didn't understand their unconventional start. Through it all, Morgan had been his rock, her unwavering love and support, transforming him in ways he never thought possible. Alexander, Morgan's voice brought him back to the present. It was time for their vows. He took a deep breath, looking into the eyes of the woman who had changed his world. "Morgan," he began, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "When we first met, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a plan for my life, for my legacy. But you showed me that the greatest legacy a person can leave is love. You and Hope, you've given my life meaning beyond anything I could have imagined. I promise to love you both, to cherish every moment we have together, and to always remember that the most valuable thing in my life isn't in any bank account or boardroom. It's right here, with you and our daughter." Tears glistened in Morgan's eyes as she began her own vows. "Alex, our story didn't have the most romantic beginning," she said with a soft laugh, eliciting chuckles from their guests. "But I wouldn't change a single moment of it, because it brought us here. You've shown me what it means to truly trust someone, to build a partnership based on respect and understanding. I promise to stand by you, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to remind you every day of the wonderful man and father you've become. You and Hope are my home, my heart, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." As they exchanged rings, Hope tugged at Alexander's pant leg. "Daddy," she stage whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is Mommy your princess now?" The gathered friends and family laughed, and Alexander scooped Hope up into his arms. "Mommy's always been my princess," he told her, his eyes meeting Morgan's over their daughter's head. "And you're our little queen." The officiant smiled warmly at the family tableau before her. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Alexander leaned in to kiss Morgan, Hope between them, cheers erupted from their small but enthusiastic audience. In that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, Alexander marveled at how far they had come. The reception was a relaxed affair, held in a nearby boathouse overlooking the lake. As the evening wore on, Alexander found Morgan standing at the water's edge, gazing out at the setting sun. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Hawkins," he murmured. Morgan leaned back into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how different things were 5 years ago. If someone had told me then that this is where we'd end up." Alexander chuckled. "I probably would have fired them for being delusional." Morgan turned in his arms, her expression serious. "Are you happy, Alex? Really happy?" He looked at her, taking in the love and concern in her eyes, then glanced over to where Hope was twirling on the dance floor with her grandmother. Morgan's mother, now healthy and vibrant thanks to the treatment they'd been able to provide. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," he said softly. "You and Hope, you're everything to me. More than I ever knew I wanted or needed." Morgan's smile was luminous. "I love you, Alexander Hawkins." "And I love you, Morgan Hawkins," he replied, sealing the words with a kiss. As they made their way back to the party, Hope ran up to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, Mommy, come dance." Alexander scooped her up, twirling her around as Morgan laughed. As they joined the other guests on the makeshift dance floor, moving together as a family, Alexander felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. Later that night, after Hope had fallen asleep and the last of the guests had departed, Alexander and Morgan stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, overlooking the twinkling lights of New York City. "You know," Morgan mused, "when I first agreed to have your baby, I never imagined we'd end up here." Alexander pulled her close. "I'm glad life had other plans for us." Morgan looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and mischief. "So, Mr. Hawkins, now that we're officially married, do you think it might be time to give Hope a sibling?" Alexander's heart skipped a beat at the thought. "Mrs. Hawkins, are you proposing we renegotiate our original contract?" he teased. Morgan laughed, the sound more beautiful to Alexander than any symphony. "I think we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement," she said, pulling him in for a kiss. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city sprawling out before them, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a cold business proposition to a love that had overcome every obstacle, Their story was one of growth, forgiveness, and the transformative power of love. He thought of the contract that had once defined their relationship, now nothing more than ashes in the fireplace of his study. In its place was something far more binding and infinitely more precious, a commitment forged through challenges and strengthened by choice. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Alexander made a silent vow. He would spend the rest of his life cherishing the family he and Morgan had created, nurturing the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. For in the end, he realized, that was the greatest legacy a person could leave. Not wealth or power or business empires, but love. Love that endures, that transforms, that conquers all. And as Morgan nestled closer in his arms, as thoughts of their past, present, and future swirled in his mind, Alexander Hawkins knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now, and we'll see you there.